In the following podcast episode, there will be discussions and mentions of death. We understand that this topic may be sensitive and evoke strong emotional reactions. We encourage you to exercise self-care and listen at your own discretion. If you feel uncomfortable or distressed, please consider pausing or skipping this particular episode. Your well-being is important to us.
Hey, Polly.
Hey, Greg, how are you?
I'm all right. Today is part 3 of the Gloria Christ Griefology. We are going to be hearing from Gloria as well as Ryan Loisel, the program director of Friendsway.
It's been interesting that there's so many aspects of grief, so many different ways to look at it and deal with it.
Right. And this one's focusing on childhood grief, children grief. So this is going to be, I'm assuming, pretty tough. To go through to hear. I'm pretty sure
Gloria and Ryan are two stand-up people, so I'm sure.
Very true.
I'm sure they'll help us through.
They'll guide us.
They'll guide us.
So we're counting on you, Gloria and Ryan, to get us through. So without further ado,
this is our third part of a 3-part series that we hope is going to expand, because as I emailed Greg, I said, I have a list. We have dealt with sort of the connecting pieces of grief. So Ryan, having you here is the beautiful button on this 3-part series because of your expertise with children. You are LICSW, so a licensed social worker, and the program director for Friendsway. And in your role, you do the day-to-day operations, including intake, referrals, and community outreach, as well as supervising the volunteer facilitators. You've been there for 24 years? 24 years, wow. And you have done a wide variety of pediatric palliative care and children's bereavement. You've served as the program director of Jeff's Place, a bereavement center in Wayland, Mass, and which is a part of Friendsway, founder Jenny Kaplan. You studied at URI and received a degree in human development and family studies with a minor in thanatology.
The study of death, dying, and bereavement.
Yes, which is Thanos. If you do the Marvel series, right? Thanos, and it's Greek, which to my sister people. You went to Simmons College in Boston and received your master's in social work. You have presented at several conferences for NASW, the National Association of Social Workers, and NAGC, the National Alliance for Grieving Children, on children's bereavement. You joined the board of directors for NACG in January 2022. So welcome.
Thank you, Laura.
It's, really interesting in that I know we've never met, but our paths have crossed, and I have referred several people to you because of the work that I do. And I am honored to tell you that the praise is mighty, my friend, for the work that you do. So thank you.
Well, thank you for that.
This is going to be very hard to do any introduction after.
Well, I already have a question that's not on our list.
Go for it.
Ryan, what do you do for you? That sounded like that sounds like a really heavy lift, a heavy day. And I know it's all important work and that can be really uplifting, but you must have some really good, self-help skills and stuff you do for you, or at least I hope you do.
What one would think and hope, right? And it's always interesting as you're in the room and someone's reading your bio, you're like, what do I say? What do I do? I'll just keep looking. So I mean, I'm a big beach person, a big vacation person. We have some property in the Caribbean, so I try to scoot off there a few times a year. And I say typical stuff, even just acknowledging the sun today and the weather breaking in the spring. and being active at the gym and also being a couch potato when I don't want to move for 12 hours. So it's that balance.
Yeah.
All right.
Excellent.
You know, and because the work of grief, especially with children in bereavement, um, it's you're not just dealing with one element. And if you are in this profession, you are naturally empathetic and sympathetic, and you take in, right? You absorb the what you see, what you feel, all of those external layers of grief. And so I'm glad to hear that you do the things for self-care, because I think when loss and grief impacts children, it hits a little harder.
Absolutely.
And because the skill set and the emotional social development and the brain development is nowhere near the level of cognitive ability to reconcile what has happened when it comes to loss. And before I let you speak on the particular nature of bereavement and children, I will speak to, so what I do is I work with children in the creative capacity. I do a lot of work with trauma-informed behavior using an arts template. Um, and and I've been doing this a long time. It seems like in the last 2 years, there has been an overwhelming amount of children who are impacted by grief, multiple layers of grief. And because there's no real way to exorcise that, it begins to show up somatically. So I see the way they carry themselves. I see the way that their prefrontal cortex is nowhere. It's just not working. Um, and so you begin to have these layers of stacked developmental delay or behavioral conditions that are directly associated with grief. So the work that you're doing is beyond just, well, I lost my mom, or I lost my dad, or I lost an entire family, or I lost my home, or and and and
Mhm.
and so please talk about the ways that grief impacts children differently, and what we need to be doing to create the language that is generative and transformative to help these beautiful, precious children.
Sure. So we've got several days for me to just go on and on about all this, right?
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
Right. I mean, I say, like, in short, acknowledging that they're kids first, right? These kids have endured losses, death losses, divorce, changes of schools, all these things. I say it, I don't know if irks is the right word, but I'll use it now. It irks me when I hear people say kids are resilient, right?
Same.
They can be, and they are, and there should be like an asterisk if provided with the support from adults and the nurturing and the allowing the space to feel the feelings. And communication is one of the biggest things that we see in our themes for groups, in that there is not a lot of communication between the kids and the adults, especially when grief comes into play. And I have, lots of years of experience, and I'll say that for kids, they want to know something. They want to know, like, is it going to rain today? And you're like, well, you should be prepared. Like, let's put a jacket on and have the umbrella just in case. How often are kids not prepared to go to a funeral, or not even invited to go to the funeral, And it's because they don't know what to expect there. They don't know what sounds, and they're going to see pictures or a whole video montage. Or why were people laughing? Are they laughing at my dad? Because that's not okay. Or see, the biggest thing that I see or hear from kids is they have said to me over the 24 years, I don't understand why people say I'm sorry for your loss.
Mm,
Like I don't understand it, because we're conditioning kids and adults to apologize if they've done something wrong,
right.
right? So it's all about language. And I didn't, they're like, but they didn't make my dad die. Why are they saying I'm sorry? Because then you're left with that uncomfortable, like, that's okay.
Mm,
And it's not okay that their person died. So I'm always trying to pay attention to the feeling behind the words that I'm trying to convey. Right. So as you mentioned earlier, Gloria, having that empathy and sympathy, and to say, I'm trying to convey that I'm sad that your dad died. So I'll say that. I'm sad that your dad died. I'm sorry. I'm sad to hear that your wife died. And it almost catches people in their tracks, because they're like, nobody's ever said that to me.
right.
It feels a little bit different, and it doesn't feel like a conversation end. So we're trying to help our kids be empowered to have the right. I say there's, like, the grief bill of rights, to be able to ask the questions that they want answers to. They might want to know more about their dad and his brown hair, or what was he like when he was my age. And we just heard last night in one of our groups that kids are feeling like it's not okay to be mad, because if you're mad, the person who died wouldn't like that. I mean, these are coming from adults. And we are always saying that all feelings are okay. It depends on what you do with them to act them out, right? I can be mad and angry that my dad died, and I can talk about it, and I can throw a pillow against the wall, or I can join karate to get my feelings out. Don't dismiss my feelings. Don't say that I can't be mad. So again, we're trying to give kids the permission to, I say, like, take their mask off. And
Mm.
you don't have to always be in, be in check. And I always also say that there's so much judgment in grief,
Mm,
right? I mean, as I'm looking and talking to you, I don't know if you have a grief story or history, but I can't tell by looking at you if you're quote unquote experiencing grief or if you're grieving.
right. Right.
So there's so many layers to all of this, and even more so with kids.
And I think also, not there's not only the judgment, but I think adults tend to tell kids how they're supposed to feel,
Mhm.
because that falls into what they can handle, what adults can handle.
Absolutely. I've been saying that for years. It's not so much about the adult asking the child to go to, like, do you want to go to Grammy's funeral? And here's what to expect. If that adult went to a funeral when she was that age and was not prepared and was not given any information and walked into the room, or if it's years ago and is being waked in the living room, and you're just like, what in the world is happening? I'm feeling, and this word is obviously overused, traumatized, right? But like, I had that feeling. There's no way I'm going to have my kids subjected to that. So oftentimes the adult is making the decision based on their previous history. And when kids are told to not cry and be strong and you have to be brave for your mom, that's diminishing the feelings that they're having, to be like, how am I going to be the man of the house when I'm 10? Oh, I don't know what that means. Do I get a job?
Right.
Well, yeah, not only diminishing, but you are teaching this child to be parentified, and they
Exactly.
will develop habits that turn into real behavior modifications um, when they're adults,
Right.
that get in the way of them living their lives. And um, so So what do we do as the brilliant forces that we are to create a language that is permitted is not the word I want, because I tend to think, we're going to permit children to feel something. So what is a language framework that you have found works in speaking with children?
Sure. So as I'm thinking, we also do a summer camp for kids, and one of well, she's technically volunteering, but she does a lot. And she'll always say, we're giving the kids the opportunity to explore and step outside their comfort zone. We're giving the kids the opportunity to do these things, right? So we're hoping that they're going to latch on and, okay, this is our expressive arts component, or this is our canoe and kayak component. So we're going to give you the opportunity to try something you've never tried before. So again, I think it's cultivating, and even so many people are saying, well, we have to create a safe space. That's under the assumption that my safe is the same as your safe spaces.
Mm.
And I might say, okay, this is a safe space to talk. And you're like, I don't feel safe. I feel nervous. I can't get there. That's my assumption. So the movement in the language is let's create a braver space for you. How can we
I love that.
encourage, right? Like, how
Love
can
that.
we encourage you to be your authentic self? And we've got to be vulnerable as adults too. We can't expect that the kids are going to come up and ask all the questions and, ask about heaven and share all these things if we don't give the kids the opportunity to have that dialogue. If a child comes up and asks you a question and you change the subject on them, what's their takeaway? It's like, oh, I'm not supposed to talk to Gloria about that. Or, she's giving me a reason. I think I'm gonna ask Greg about that because I feel like she's keeping something from me. Because the kids are paying attention. They are perceptive,
Yep.
and it comes out, as you said, somatically, so many kids having anxiety and nerves, and why am I feeling this way? So we're trying to give these kids the tools to understand this is what's happening in your body and recognize it, and let's figure out what we want to do to safely let that anxiety and anger be released.
So then you have nonverbal kids, and then you have kids who have sensory issues. So then you really limit the scope on how you can help them express what they're intrinsically feeling. So sorry, Polly, jump on in there.
I think Greg was
Oh,
trying.
I feel like there's like a big red arrow blinking at me because I've like fallen victim to pretty much everything that you're saying back when, my mother had passed and I was, didn't want to, I wasn't sure how to involve the kids, and I wasn't quite sure on how to tell them everything about it, and not knowing what they know, even though I didn't have the conversation with them, just like, how much do they know, and what is age appropriate? And now hearing things like this, and then thinking about as many times as I've written my condolences whenever someone has told me about a passing, and I can't tell you how many times I said I'm sorry for your loss.
Mhm.
I mean, just changing that verbiage to I'm sad. To me, it would hit harder. It would
Mhm.
let you know that, I really do feel for you. So that big red arrow is my
Hugging.
But playing off what Greg is saying is, are there opportunities for adults in these children's lives to learn the language? Because people can sit with kids and other kids and have a great experience sharing their grief and learning. But if they go back to homes where the adults don't have the language and the words to use, it's not helpful for those kids, right?
So I wonder, I think a workshop, especially for the grandparenting programs that you all do, because so many children that step into, if they've lost a parent or both parents. So that's a loss or a double loss. And then they step into a world of being raised in a kinship situation. So there's the loss of the aunt or the uncle or the grandparent who's now taking on the role of the parent, and maybe they had to relocate. So there is a value to having these opportunities. And I think that's something about this special 3-part series that we certainly have discovered is, what would it look like to have an offshoot of our sessions where we do offer a workshop in the language of grief, or a soul collage workshop, or something where we are educating those who are experiencing all of this, plus trying to raise the child who's experiencing this. So let me just add that to my list.
Right. Well, right. I mean, they say so much psychoeducation can be done, and there's parts of our adult group. So I feel like a lot of people know that, okay, right, Friendsway works with kids 3 to 18, and we do. We're also working with the primary caregiver that's raising these children who have experienced grief. And I feel like sometimes that's doesn't seem like it's the focal point. And we know that if you're the adult who is raising children who are grieving, that to take care of the kids, you've got to take care and acknowledge the caregiver's needs. So that's what our peer-based support group for our adults looks like, because all the adults go around and say who they are, the ages of their kids or grandkids that they have, the death that's impacted their family. And then after everybody does a brief intro, then it's like, okay, what's happening with your kids? And if we're seeing that a group is really not quite understanding like the developmental understanding for kids at particular ages and stages in their development for grief, we'll provide a handout and we'll talk about it to say, not that this isn't exhaustive, it doesn't mean that your kid needs to check off all the boxes, but have you seen some of these changes since they went from middle school to high school? And having them understand that, oh, there is more to their dad dying, that this is going to affect them lifelong. And every transition that dad would have been a part of, this child is thinking, my dad's not going to be there, and he's not going to be there for me having my first date or my first car ride or all these things. And sharing the truth. I mean, I could talk for hours here, that it's so important, especially when the kids are asking the questions. If they're like, Mom, how come I don't know how dad died? Everybody else in my group knows how their person died. To me, that's a point where that child is looking for the information. And then the adult, I say, can answer the question with the question to be like, so, so Polly, what might you want to know? And they're wanting to know something is probably way, way less than what you think that they want to know. And then you give them that bite-sized morsel of information, and then like, anything else you want to know? And then they might be like, no, I'm good. And then they go back to playing. So it's paying attention, but you need to create those opportunities for the sharing to occur. Otherwise, your kid is not going to be the one talking to you, and you're gonna find out through other people that they've like, oh, Ryan's been asking a ton of questions. Like, really, he won't ask anything of me.
I think where it comes into like a haze in my thinking, I could be completely wrong, is when it comes to suicide. And because I know that a lot of times the adult is still struggling with, why did this happen? How come I didn't see it? And then trying to have to answer that question on how did my person die? When it comes to suicide, do you have any tips?
Sure. I mean, we do have a specialized night for our families who are in that situation, either a death by suicide, overdose, or substance misuse. And again, you're needing to factor in the age of the child as well as their cognitive development and what they want to know at age 5, the day after daddy died. You may just say, I've got something really sad to tell you that daddy died. They may not be asking why or how, or again, when your kid is asking, it's like, well, again, right now, we don't know. All that we know is that his body stopped working. And when I have that information, we'll share and talk about that with you. I think the parents' biggest concern, and I say parents, but the adults' biggest concern is their viewpoint is going to change of their dad. I don't want them to have that lasting image or impression. And I can hear that. I can understand that. I challenge the adult to say, if dad had a heart condition, and grandma had a heart condition, and it's like, this is something that's hereditary, and this is something we need to talk about, and these are steps that we can take to prevent some of these things. Some of these are totally preventable, right? Kids are going to hear that daddy had maybe a sickness in his brain. And, there's times we may use that language and to say that, they wanted to stop this pain. They felt like there was no other way for them to go on living, and they chose to make their body die. And depending on the age of the child, they may ask, all right, I just really want to know, how, or I really want to know why this happened. And there's so many whys that we can't answer. And there might be a question that you could say, so I would express a lot of curiosity. I try not to ask a why question, but I'll say, I'm curious to know your interest in knowing that. And then you have an idea that's giving you a little pause to be like, I've got a little time that I bought here. The child is going to say, well, people keep saying I'm just like my dad. And what if I'm going to die just like my dad? And I don't want that to happen. And then you find out that that's what their fear is. And then you can start to address that.
Brian's like a wealth of knowledge.
Oh, I know. It's just profound what you are stating, because and it's appropriately truthful. I don't think we lie to children, but I think that we are appropriately truthful
I love that.
for the reasons that you just stated. They are curious and they do want to know, because the fear, that fear aligns so closely with loss. And also, if they've heard about someone else dying, they may think they're next, right? And I would love to hear how you feel, or the facts. Grief in children, just like grief in all of us, does not follow a step by step by step. It's different, if the circumstances are different, if the family structure is different, if the cultural is different, we don't talk about it, but we're going to go to the funeral, but we're not going to talk about it, and you're going to see for yourself that this, So talk to me, or talk to us a little bit about the steps of grief in a child's development.
So as you said, Gloria, it's not a linear process.
Yeah.
There's so many, I say, illustrations over social media of a lot of grief pages that I'll follow. And, one will say, well, this is what they think that grief looks like. And then they give you another one. It's like, this is what it really looks like. Right. So it's like that ball of yarn that you don't know where it started. You don't know how to undo this piece. You've got this massive knot right here, and you're wondering what that is. And grief is messy.
Oh,
Right.
just say that again one more time, please.
Grief is messy.
Yeah, and nobody says that.
Right.
It's really messy.
It is. And as you said earlier, there's so many layers to it, right? We think of like Maslow and the hierarchy of needs.
Mhm.
We have so many families that will never ever get to us because they are struggling with, how am I keeping a roof over my head? I don't have transportation. We don't have any food. So yeah, I'd love to talk about my mental health. I have to focus on my physical structure and everything, right? So there's so many losses, and as you mentioned, secondary losses and moving and everything. So for kids, and I always take this from a professor that I had who's on our founding board. I don't know where she got it, but kids grow in spurts. They also grieve in spurts
Like that.
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
adults who are calling us, more often than not, they're saying, I don't know if my kid is quote unquote okay. They're not talking to me. They don't quote unquote look like they're grieving. And my question is, as I do a lot of presentations, and I'll bring one of these things up to say, so show me on your face that you're grieving. I mean, you can look sad, but I'm not going to know that that's equated to like you're grieving the death of your dog that happened last night, or you're moving, or your wife died a year ago. So grief is going to look different for the kids, teens, and adults individually, as well as depending on however they express themselves as a person. I'm an expressive person. If I were to experience the death of somebody close, I would likely be crying about it. I would likely be wanting to talk about it. I wouldn't not talk about it. So if I'm a child who is typically really expressive and I'm now holding my cards in, I'm not talking to anybody, those are those signs of like, this is not Ryan. This is something that he's not, again, maybe I'm not feeling safe to talk with you. Maybe I don't feel that I can trust you yet. I might be doing that, but paying attention to the positive and negative sways of how that person is navigating grief is going to be more indicative as to how they're going to do in their process, and even more so, the best predictor of how the children are going to do in their grief process. Any guesses?
There's probably a direct parallel, right?
For the mental health of the surviving caregiver.
Yeah.
Wow.
And we will talk about, we're all on our grief journey, and let's say today when you come to group, it's not that you're not missing your person. You're in an okay, and again, whatever that looks like and means, but you're in an all right space. Like, I miss my dad. I've thought about him a couple times today, but the thoughts haven't been as intrusive or debilitating. But then like tomorrow, I can't get out of bed. And it doesn't mean that I didn't miss my dad today. Other things were either going better for me, or I was distracted, or it just wasn't the focal point. But like tomorrow's his birthday. So that might be the reason why I could be feeling this way. So it's paying attention to all of the moments. We're going to have those grief bursts of, wow, I didn't realize New Year's Day was going to hit me so hard, because this is the first calendar year that my person is not coming into this year with me.
A lot.
It is.
A
It's a
lot.
lot. And
So much.
yeah, and it's unfortunately the amount of competent resources within schools that could be that extra layer is just not available. It's just not. And because of that, sometimes behavior and sometimes deficits in comprehension are mislabeled as
Mhm.
something else, but what it really is grief in one of those stages,
Mhm.
or grief that's just not been acknowledged.
Acknowledged.
Acknowledged in a way that a child can begin to understand that it's okay. It's not okay to misbehave. It's not okay to become aggressive, but it's really grief. So let's talk about that grief and figure out ways that are more productive to express that grief.
Absolutely.
Oh,
Families join your group at any point of their grief? Like, I'm guessing families just aren't prepared for grief, So you think you've got it, you think, I've got control of this, and it's 6 months later, and you're like, wow, I really dropped the ball. My kid and I really need some support.
Mhm.
Are you guys still welcome people in?
You're saying like 6 months after?
Yeah.
Well, right. I mean, again, we're not a clinical program, so we're not designed to work immediately after a death.
Okay.
That being said, right,
Yeah.
because we know that someone could be sick and dying from cancer for years,
Mhm.
and maybe the family has mentally and emotionally prepared for that, and they've been in some anticipatory grief support, either group and or counseling, and they're navigating it differently than someone who their dad had a massive heart attack and he was never sick.
Mhm.
So those two particular situations, again, based on the ages of the kids. So we generally say, and again, there's like asterisks everywhere, that typically folks are reaching out to us several weeks, several months, or in your case, kind of sometimes it's several years after. They could have been 5 when their dad died. They're now 15. And they're like, you know what? Never went to grief support stuff, never sought therapy. I've been alive longer now without my dad than I had him. And I'm feeling lost and I want to be with other people who get it.
Mhm.
So again, we will happily talk with somebody, either in anticipation of a death or immediately after. Like my husband died last night, and I've got to tell my kids when they get out of school today. We'll give them that working knowledge of things and some resources, though we also acknowledge that we are not your first stop in your process.
Mhm.
So
which is
again,
so smart. That is so smart because the needs are so prevalent at
and
that.
different and raw,
Yeah.
and you feel like you're in a fog in that initial, several weeks, several days. So again, it's one thing to come to one person and talk about it, but you've got 20 to 25 other adults sitting around upstairs and 8 to 10 kids in each age group. And it's, just not how we're designed to work with families. Again, several weeks, several months, and like I said, sometimes it's even several years. And after a family leaves, sometimes, not all the time, but they may revisit us either after another death has happened, or their grief just it like feels and looks different, and they're like, I came here as a 5-year-old, but I'm in middle school now, and it's hitting different, so I want to try to come back.
Let's talk about that 15-year-old or that 5-year-old that's now in middle school and there was a loss. And this is for Greg and Polly and the statistical work around drug. What did you say, Ryan? Because I love this term other than drug abuse, it's drug misuse.
I said substance
Substance
misuse. Yeah.
misuse. Um, Is there a study that shows the direct correlation between unresolved grief or unprocessed grief in direct proportion to substance misuse? Do we know about that? Is it can it be, it would be interesting to look at the ways that grief at 5 that's not been appropriated, right?
Hmm.
Um, turns into maladaptive substance misuse in 7th grade. Because once you go down that track, it's probably very difficult to get back to, well, let's look at not covering this up even more. Let's talk about ways that we need to uncover what you've been feeling and why it feels different.
I think in prevention, we would need a lot of data. for that one, to make that correlation, because
Mhm.
it would, I mean, that person would have to come to the conclusion that this is why I experimented with this substance. So I think before we can make that leap, I mean, Ryan may have a different opinion, but I think before we can make that leap, we would need a lot more data.
Yeah, because it's probably not available,
Right.
right?
Right. I mean, I know, right, and I don't have the study to back it up. We know that kids who are bereaved, they just have a different outlook on life and a view on life. And depending on their, on their ACEs, on their, community and network, they're certainly more susceptible to a substance misuse or driving under the influence or like all of those things. But yeah, I don't know where we would kind of pull that specific,
So what's the magic wand? What's the magic grief wand that takes away some of the hurt?
well, if you have found this magic wand, I don't think it's on Amazon.
No, no.
I would say, I mean, it's gonna be different. I think the magic wand to it, to use your words, Gloria, to take the hurt away, is to talk about it, is to acknowledge it. I mean, there's so many, it's like a herd of elephants are in your room, and why aren't we talking about this? And that makes it harder. And then because we're not talking about it, it's like I'm tensing up and I'm getting anxious and I'm either overeating or I'm undereating or I'm not sleeping. And then so it's like it's baby steps. It's acknowledging communication. It's acknowledging that this has happened. And if we don't talk about it, or if I don't ask you about it, then your take home is I'm not supposed to.
Right.
That's not right.
Mhm.
So I'm going to keep it to myself. And if we're all grieving in our own silos under one roof, we know that that's not the recipe for success. So I think it's just having that conversation.
Now,
Yeah.
for those who are listening and viewing, and they're either going through it or they are wondering, the next steps to take, and that want to get in contact with you, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
Sure. I mean, our website is friendsway.org, phone 401-921-0980. We've got lots of people that will reach out to us via social media. So, I mean, Google Friendsway and you'll find us and figure out whether you want to volunteer, to donate, to serve dinner with us, to do a cleanup of our, organizational stuff, become a family, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, because we all know that grief is not totally preventable. But I'd like to believe, and in my heart of hearts, I do feel that if we can change the way that we use language around things, topics that we're not supposed to talk about, if we start talking about it and use language that is proactive and emotional and permissive, then maybe that's the magic wand. Maybe there's, and the work that you're doing and the work that Polly and Greg are doing, that is.
And the work you're doing, Gloria.
Well, thank you. But I just have to believe that we have to keep changing the language, and we have not change it even, just have it.
Just
Have
use it. Use
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Because that's the only way. We have to change the narrative. And we have to be the change makers that are changing the narrative to help others change the narrative.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank
You're
you.
pretty remarkable, Mr. Ryan.
Very true.